Mic check 1 2 3. Mic check 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
So the Committee on House Administration will come to order. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank the members of the committee and our witnesses for joining us today, and apologies for the 50-minute delay in the beginning of this hearing. We were voting on the floor of the House. We tried to give notice, but at least this is a virtual hearing, so you're not stuck in a little committee room in the Longworth building. As we begin, I want to note we're holding this hearing in compliance with the regulations for remote committee proceedings pursuant to House Resolution 8, and we ask everyone to keep their microphones muted when they're speaking, as well as to unmute when you are speaking. Members and witnesses, please keep your cameras on at all times, even if you need to step away for a moment. And as we recall, members cannot, under the rules, participate in two remote proceedings at the same time. This time, I'd like to ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and have any written statements be made part of the record. And without objection, hearing none, that is now ordered. Today's hearing continues the oversight of this committee, the House of and the House of Representatives, of issues related to the January 6, 2021 insurrectionist attack on the Capitol. Specifically, we'll hear from our distinguished witnesses about measures to reform and update the U.S. Capitol Police Board and to improve accountability for the Capitol Police Board. As I've observed at our prior hearings, I continue to believe that Congress must establish a commission focused specifically on the January 6th insurrection. Today, the House is voting to do just that. Unfortunately, just since our hearing last week, we've seen additional reminders about why that's important. Last week, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said, "I don't think anybody is questioning the legitimacy of the presidential election." 3 days later, former President Trump said, and I quote, "The presidential election of 2020 will go down as the crime of the century," all caps, and that it was, quote, "by far the greatest election fraud in the history of our country," unquote. That type of rhetoric is similar to the comments the former president made after the election, inflammatory and misrepresentations about the election, which historic and bipartisan majorities of the House and Senate concluded incited the violent insurrection of January 6th, and that compelled his impeachment after the event. More than 6 months after the election, others continue to challenge results, including in Arizona, where a so-called audit is underway directed by Arizona Senate, even though Republican state and local election officials have criticized it. For example, the recorder of Maricopa County, a Republican, said this week, and I quote, "We can't indulge these insane lies any longer as a party, as a state, or as a country." Now, even the attack on the Capitol the former president incited is itself subject to bizarre alternate reality versions. At a hearing last week, one member called the attackers, quote, "peaceful patriots," and another said it is, quote, "a bold-faced lie," to describe the attack as an insurrection, and that really was more like, quote, "a normal tourist visit conducted in, quote, an orderly fashion." Anyone who was here, and many of us were on the floor that day, anyone who's seen the horrific video and images of that day knows better. I agree with Ranking Member Davis that a more appropriate characterization is to describe the insurrection as a terrorist attack. But the fact that members of Congress who were here that day and whose safety was threatened can say that January 6th was a tourist visit by peaceful patriots shows why it remains critical to have a dedicated review of the January 6th attack conducted by a commission of experts focused solely on that task. In the meantime, this committee will continue its important oversight work. Today, we are again focusing on the U.S. Capitol Police, as well as the 3-person Capitol Police Board, which oversees the department. When the Capitol Police Department was formed nearly 2 centuries ago, there were just 24 states. The House had just 213 members. There were no congressional office buildings other than the Capitol itself, and the Supreme Court still met in the Capitol. Just 4 watchmen comprised the entirety of the original force. cattle grazed on the slopes of Capitol Hill. Times were different, to put it mildly. Since then, the Congress and this committee in particular have helped the Capitol Police evolve to adapt to changes in the nature of Congress, to changes in our society, and in several instances in response to violent attacks against the Capitol or members. These changes have consistently been about making the Capitol and those who work in and who visit Congress safer, while also making sure those who protect us are as safe as possible as well. There's no doubt the steps the Capitol Police took, the Capitol Police management took in preparation for January 6th were inadequate. As the Capitol Police Inspector General has shared with us in prior hearings, those shortcomings revealed institutional deficiencies which must be addressed. One of our prior hearings focused on the IG's work, which is ongoing. The question was raised, if the Capitol Police Board oversees the department, who oversees that board? That is not the department IG's role. By statute, his mandate is to review the department, not the board. But that is not to say there's no oversight of the board. To the contrary, each individual board member is subject to multiple lenses of oversight by various congressional committees, as well as inspector generals within the Congress. Our oversight steps to date include working with the Honorary Task Force and inspector generals. We've laid the groundwork for this hearing, which will let us continue to explore these pressing questions with expert witnesses and Capitol Police Board members themselves. Among the questions we will seek to address: first, how do we balance the need to secure Capitol Hill, the home of Congress and the Supreme Court, with the need to maintain open access to the citizens we serve? How can we strike an appropriate balance between public transparency of the Capitol Police with the inherently sensitive nature of the specifics of how they protect the campus? Should the Capitol Police rethink their mission and focus more on their force protection role rather than like a traditional city police department? What organizational changes must be made to ensure that officers can receive regular training to improve the unique skills needed to protect the Capitol, training which will also keep them safer? Does the department need more resources, both personnel and funding, for things like equipment, training, and improving its intelligence and counter surveillance capabilities? So does it need to use its existing resources better, or maybe both? These and other important questions are the subject of our ongoing oversight, and as I've noted before, but it still bears repeating, our important and necessary review of the department's performance as an institution and its leadership does not diminish the courage and the valor of the men and women who so bravely fought to defend the Capitol on January 6th, or of those from other jurisdictions who responded and sought to hold the line along with their brothers and sisters in uniform in the Capitol Police Department. We've all got to work together to make the Capitol Police Department stronger and more effective, not just to keep the Capitol and those who work here safer, but to keep the men and women who wear its uniforms safer and to protect the legislative branch of government. I'd now like to recognize our ranking member, Mr. Davis, for any opening comments he might like to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, before I get started, thank you, Madam Chair. First, before I get started, I just want to note that the hearing I was hoping to have today, the entire voting membership of the Capitol Police Board in front of an oversight committee, has not happened in 76 years. It would have been a step toward the board as a whole, demonstrating they are serious about accountability and transparency. Instead, we got another reminder of why the board must be reformed in order to have accountability and transparency from the entity charged with the protection of members, staff, visitors, and the Capitol itself. I believe the absence of the Senate Sergeant at Arms today demonstrates the underlying issue with the Capitol Police Board, a lack of oversight. The board doesn't make security decisions just for the House or just for the Senate side of the Capitol, but together, the board's decisions impact the entire Capitol complex. And when they are voting, they're not acting in their roles as Sergeant at Arms for the Senate or for the House or as the architect of the Capitol, but as a member of the Capitol Police Board. It's incredibly disappointing that the Senate Sergeant at Arms, who is appointed and controlled by Leader Chuck Schumer, has refused to appear before this committee when former members of the board all testified before the Senate just a few months ago. This only further highlights the need for change. During our hearings with the United States Capitol Police Inspector General, there was a reoccurring question about who oversees the board. I firmly believe that question was answered. It's this committee's job to oversee the Capitol Police Board on behalf of the House. That being said, I believe the board structure is flawed and needs reform. As I've said before, we can gather all of the recommended changes to the USCP that we want, but the reality is they have very little authority to execute any of these changes without approval from the board. So if we want to overhaul security on Capitol Hill, then we need to look at who's making those security decisions, not just the department who's charged with executing them. A 2017 GAO report, which I submitted for the record a few weeks ago during this committee's first security-related hearing since January 6th, found that the Capitol Police Board has an unusual amount of power compared to other police boards. The board establishes regulations for training of the U.S. Capitol Police personnel, determines when an officer can be terminated, approves officers in emergency situations, designs, installs, and maintains the Capitol security systems, and much more. That same GAO report published 4 years ago recommended a number of significant reforms to the Capitol Police Board to improve the functionality of the board and to increase transparency and accountability. Unfortunately, most, if not all, of the GAO's recommendations have been ignored up until this point. Over the course of 2 hearings, we heard the Inspector General of the United States Capitol Police, Michael Bolton, make recommendation after recommendation for how the department could improve after January 6th, which I appreciated, but because of how the law is written, many of those recommendations would require approval from the Capitol Police Board. So at the same time the IG is making these recommendations, he's also testifying that he does not have the purview over the Capitol Police Board, and he does not know who does. After further research, Mr. Bolton testified that he does not believe there is any oversight of the Capitol Police Board, which, as I said, is responsible for nearly every security decision being made on the Hill prior to January 6th and still today. I agree with many of Mr. Bolton's recommendations, but I want to see them actually implemented, which is why today's hearing is so important. Following that hearing, which revealed there is essentially no oversight of the board, the Inspector General for the Architect of the Capitol testified before our committee that one of the voting members of the Capitol Police Board, the architect in charge of the Capitol grounds, wasn't even consulted about the security planning leading up to January 6th. In fact, he testified the architect's concerns are frequently ignored. Sorry about that, Brett. Let's change that. So we have a board with incredible power over security decisions with no oversight, who is largely ignoring one of its 3 voting members. And we have a GAO report from 4 years ago noting significant issues with the board's decision-making process and recommending significant changes, but it's been ignored. This seems like a recipe for disaster, and in fact, it was on January 6th. The board structure does not allow for quick emergency decisions. It does not allow for any accountability. While I'm disappointed to not be hearing from the full board today, I am looking forward to hearing from the House Sergeant at Arms, newly installed House Sergeant at Arms, and my friend General Walker, and my friend the architect of the Capitol, Brett Blanton, as well as our other expert witnesses about ways we can work to improve the functionality, accountability, and transparency of the board and the United States Capitol Police Department. Thank you, Chair Lofgren. I yield back.
The ranking member yields back. Other members may put their opening statements into the record. And I'd now like to introduce our first panel. Our first panel this afternoon includes the Honorable William J. Walker, the 38th Sergeant at Arms for the House of Representatives. He was sworn in as the Sergeant of Arms on April 26, 2021. Previously, he was the 23rd Commanding General of the District of Columbia Army and Air Force National Guard. Also, we have J. Brett Blanton, who was sworn in as the 12th Architect of the Capitol on January 16, 2020. Mr. Blanton served as a U.S. naval officer for more than 20 years. He was awarded a Bronze Star with Combat V for heroism in Iraq. Prior to being named Architect of the Capitol, He served as Deputy Vice President of the Metropolitan Washington Airport Authority. Karen Gibson, the Senate Sergeant at Arms, declined our invitation to appear, but has submitted a statement for the record, which by unanimous consent will be made part of the record. I'd like to advise our witnesses that their full written statements will be made part of the record, and we ask you to stay within about 5 minutes of your testimony so that we'll have adequate time for questions. So first we'll turn to you, General Walker. Welcome. I think you're muted, General.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, Chairperson Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the Committee on House Administration. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on reforming the Capitol Police and improving accountability for the Capitol Police Board. 23 days ago today, I was blessed to be sworn in as the Sergeant at Arms for the House of Representatives. Prior to that, I had the honor of serving as the 23rd Commanding General for the District of Columbia National Guard, affectionately known as Capitol Guardians. Just a bit of trivia, if you can permit me. The DC National Guard was created by President Thomas Jefferson in May of 1802 and is the only always federal National Guard in the nation. The seal of the District of Columbia National Guard, which appears on our uniforms, bears the image of the citadel of this democracy, the United States Capitol, and it serves as a reminder that the foundational mission of the District of Columbia National Guard is to protect the Capitol. Through my experience as the Commanding General, I was able to make some observations on January 6, 2021. I witnessed firsthand the bravery and commitment of the United States Capitol Police officers who, alongside the Metropolitan Police, partner law enforcement agencies, and the National Guardsmen I commanded, as they restored order on that terrible day. Regrettably, I also observed that the United States Capitol Police was not properly equipped for the events that transpired that fateful day. The Metropolitan Police and others, to include the District of Columbia National Guard, were far better equipped and far better prepared. As the Sergeant at Arms, I have read and studied the reports that you mentioned, Chairperson Lofgren, that detailed the lack of U.S. Capitol Police protective equipment, including helmets, face shields, gas masks, etc. The command and control was lacking on that day, and the planning was clearly insufficient. The police officers and the guardsmen and all the law enforcement officers that responded that day clearly risked life and limb to protect the Capitol. The commitment and resolve was shared, but not the equipment and the level of training. Accordingly, the United States Capitol Police must transform to meet the future security threats, to include ones of the magnitude that we're talking about right now. We cannot let down our line officers, this institution, its members, or staff ever again. Accordingly, the United States Capitol Police is at an inflection point, and it must transform into a protective force that is able to respond to increasing threats to this institution, its members, which show no sign of lessening. The Capitol Police must be in a position where it can protect individual members at a moment's notice. This will require more dignitary protection agents that are specifically trained to protect members from threats throughout the country. The regionalization effort is one step toward this transformation. There will be growing pains, but the transformation is necessary and it will occur. As a member of the Capitol Police Board, I will hold the United States Capitol Police accountable for making this transformation. The Capitol Police will be trained to the highest standards possible, and they will be equipped with the latest technology. We will re-examine the appropriate roles and responsibilities for Capitol Police officers. We will leverage non-sworn individuals and put technology to better use. What I'm talking about here is a force multiplier that I'm explaining as the model I don't have it written down, so I'm jumping off the notes here, but the model is the TSA model, where you'll have more security officers to relieve police officers, and a police officer will be in line of sight of what I'm hoping will become United States Capitol Police security agents and security officers. This will allow us to better utilize the sworn officers. My pledge to you, Chairperson Lofgren, and to members of the committee, Ranking Member Davis and others, that I will hold the Capitol Police accountable. I pledge my best advice on all matters affecting safety and security of the Capitol complex. I have spent my entire adult life in law enforcement, security, intelligence, and counterintelligence, both as an Army officer and as a federal agent. In collaboration with the Senate Sergeant at Arms, General Karen Gibson, and the architect of the Capitol, Mr. Brett Blanton, who I regularly meet with, we are committed to improving the board processes of accountability and efficiencies. General Gibson and I are new, but Mr. Blanton has welcomed us, and we are working in an environment of collaboration, communication, and cooperation. I would urge the members of the committee to be a little patient with us as we work together, but we have the best interest of this Capitol complex at the forefront of what we're trying to accomplish. As I have noted, and as others have noted, it is hard to find another law enforcement entity that reports to an organization like the Capitol Police Board. There is also no other law enforcement agency, at least that I know of, tasked with protecting two distinct bodies of Congress and the elected representatives from all states, the district, and territories across our great nation. I agree we must do better, and I will continue to work with my counterparts to identify and pursue improvements in current policies and procedures of the U.S. Capitol Police Board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General. Now we'll turn to our architect of the Capitol, Mr. Blanton, for your 5 minutes of testimony.
Thank you, Chairperson Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to join my colleagues of the Capitol Police Board to discuss the January 6, 2021 U.S. Capitol breach and ways to reform and improve the Capitol Police and the Capitol Police Board. The events of January 6 were difficult to witness for the American people and extremely hard for all of us on campus to experience. On January 6, members of my team were preparing the grounds in the presidential inauguration stage. Our artists and trades personnel were excited to finish painting the stands bright white with a deep blue edge on the main stage of the inauguration platform. Around midday, as crowds began to appear on the west front, my staff was moved indoors or sent home. Shockingly, over the course of a couple hours, the hard work of our team was destroyed. The platform was wrecked. There was broken glass and other debris littering the grounds. The sound system and photography equipment were damaged beyond repair or stolen. 2 historic Olmsted lanterns were ripped from the ground, and blue paint was tracked all over the historic stone balustrades and Capitol building hallways. As the crowd began crashing through windows and prying open doors, my staff took several amazing actions in support of Congress. AOC employees sheltered congressional staff in their workshop to protect them from the crowd. Other members of my team raced to the roof to reverse airflow within the building to help clear the air of chemical irritants like bear repellent and pepper spray. Additionally, team members rushed bottles of water and eye wash stations to Capitol police officers in need of assistance. As an agency, we served as a shining light of hope that day, along with the Capitol Police and the other police officers that supported the Capitol. As soon as the security officials cleared the building, AOC employees worked tirelessly to clean up and began repair work. Carpenters covered up open windows and doors with plywood to secure the building. Laborers began sweeping up glass and broken furniture to enable Congress to continue its work. Our groundskeepers cleared a small mountain of debris left behind on the west and east front. Our decorative painters carefully returned the inauguration platform towards glory. We were committed to and ensured that the Electoral College certification process could continue on January 6th. Furthermore, we sharply focused on getting the campus prepared for the presidential inauguration without interruption, to signal our nation's determination for a peaceful transition of power. Like many of you, we continue to deal with the shock and disappointment of the actions of those who chose to attack the Capitol building. I remain proud of and encouraged by the professionalism displayed both by my AOC team and the Capitol Police in the face of this dangerous and stressful event. But I never want this to happen again. That's why I push Congress for support of a comprehensive campus-wide facility assessment. And I appreciate the committee's support of this important initiative, which is imperative to smartly securing the Capitol while keeping an open, historic nature of the Capitol building. In my written testimony, I outlined several areas that, in my estimation, will increase transparency and accountability of the board, increase responsiveness of the board, and make the Capitol campus safer for members, staff, and the public. Since becoming the architect of Capitol, I've continually been impressed and inspired by the great work of this agency. We have been in pandemic operations for nearly a year. We supported 4 lying-in-state or honor ceremonies and successfully facilitated a presidential inauguration. I am honored to lead a team whose extraordinary efforts on January 6th and the days that followed helped Americans of all walks of life take solace in seeing order restored at the Capitol. I'm also honored to serve on the Capitol Police Board. We owe it to the Capitol Police, members, staff, and the public to smartly reform and provide security for the Capitol complex. I will say, I am very impressed with both the new House and Senate Sergeant-at-Arms. I think the future of the board and the Capitol Police is bright with our collective leadership. I look forward to today's conversation and the discussions about positioning the board and my agency to address the ongoing security requirements for the Capitol campus. Thank you, and I stand by for any questions.
Thank you, both of you, gentlemen, Mr. Blanton. We'll now come to the time when members of the committee may ask questions for 5 minutes. I'll turn first to our ranking member, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate both of you being here today. We appreciate your willingness, actually, to be here today. As I mentioned in my opening statements, Capitol Police Board doesn't make security decisions simply for the House side, or the Senate side of the Capitol, but for the entire Capitol. It's the board acting together that makes these decisions, not its members acting individually. So again, I'm extremely disappointed that your fellow board member, Senate Sergeant-at-Arms Karen Gibson, has declined our invitation to attend this important hearing. It's been 76 years since the full Capitol Police Board appeared before an oversight committee, and Ms. Gibson's absence means that trend actually continues today. Disappointing. I'm going to ask you both a series of yes or no questions because I'm limited in time. But before I begin, it's important to note that we understand that most of the Capitol Police Board members were not in those roles on January 6th. Our goal is to set expectations for the operations of the board moving forward and to determine where consensus exists among the members of the police board. You'll have time to elaborate on your answers later if there's disagreement. But for now, a simple yes or no to the following questions would be great. Yes or no, did the Capitol Police Board act in a timely and effective manner in response to the events on January 6th? General Walker.
No, sir.
Mr. Blanton.
No.
Yes or no, do you believe the Capitol Police Board should be reformed? General Walker.
No, sir.
Mr. Blanton.
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you believe that the Capitol Police Board should be reformed?
The operations of it, yes.
In your opinion, yes or no, does the Capitol Police Board effectively conduct oversight of the Capitol Police and the overall security posture of the Capitol complex? Mr. Blanton first.
In its current construct, I would say it's a little lacking.
Mr. Sergeant-at-Arms General Walker.
What was it was a yes or no?
A yes or no? Yeah. In your opinion, does the Capitol Police Board effectively conduct oversight of the Capitol Police and the security posture of the Capitol complex?
Since I arrived, I'm gonna have to say yes.
Okay, I know General Walker, you're new here. I appreciate that, but a question I have, you guys don't need to answer this, but I would love to talk to you both later. Why have we heard from both the Capitol Police Inspector General and the architect of the Capitol Inspector General that the elements of each of their entities are in non-compliance with their recommendations? General Walker, you and I, we'll chat later. I look forward to that. Next question, yes or no? Will you give us assurances now that by the end of your next board meeting, all outstanding recommendations from the honorary report and the most recent Capitol Police Inspector General reports will have been considered by the Capitol Police Board? General Walker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Blanton.
Yes, sir.
Okay, yes or no? Can you provide assurances here on the record today that the majority and minority staffs of the Committee on House Administration will begin to receive copies of the Capitol Police Board minutes for every board meeting within a timely manner moving forward? General Walker.
No, sir.
Mr. Blanton.
I can't answer that because it takes the entire board to release it.
Well, the entire board certainly didn't think you were important enough to ask for security decisions, which is why we're here. We need to make some changes. Last yes or no question. Do you believe it's in our interest to move the Capitol Police away from being a traditional police force and more toward a protective force? General Walker.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Blanton.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I do too. Again, very disappointing. We can't get communication from the Capitol Police Board when we've seen that it is a failure of epic proportions based upon GAO studies and testimony from the Inspector Generals in both of your agencies. I look forward to discussing that further with both of you in the future. General Walker, in your written testimony today, I was actually pleased that you said the board would hold the United States Capitol Police accountable for making the transformation to a hybrid, proactive, protective law enforcement agency. Can you speak a little bit on the importance of accountability in emergencies and how you plan to hold the Capitol Police accountable? And go ahead.
So, yes, sir. Thank you for the question. So all my life, my experience as an Army officer is to, it's a task, condition, standard. You don't meet it, I have to hold you accountable. And so I would move to terminate someone who doesn't meet my expectations. So that's how I'm going to hold people accountable.
Thank you, General. I want to hold people accountable, which is why we're here today. It's been 76 years, still ongoing since we don't have your counterpart here. But accountability means transparency, and that is something the Capitol Police Board clearly does not have. And I'm disappointed in that response, but I appreciate the rest of them. Thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Raskin, the gentleman from Maryland, is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for calling this important hearing. Let's see, General Walker, let me start with you. Does the Capitol Police Board have its own staff, or does it just draw from existing staff in different agencies and offices of the members?
So right now, there is no staff. So I met with Mr. Blanton and General Gibson, and we talked about that. So that's a 5-meter target. We do need a staff.
Well, if we wanted to request the records of the board, where would those records be maintained? Whose possession are they in?
So there is an executive assistant who keeps the records, but right now we don't have a staff, sir.
Okay. When the department hires a new permanent chief of the police, where would that person go to find a history of Capitol Police Board rules and regulations?
So it's my understanding that the police have their own rules and regulations, so they would start right there with the United States Capitol Police. They are the architects of the rules and regulations. We provide oversight as any other police board would do, NYPD, LAPD, Chicago Police. That board provides that civilian oversight for the police, but the rules and regulations on how they operate, that should be right there in the USCP files.
That would be internal to the police department.
Yes, sir.
All right. Do you think that the Capitol Police Board, as we look at its operations, would be more effective if it had its own dedicated staff? Because you're telling me they only have one staff person who's an executive assistant, right?
Yes, sir. I'm answering your question, yes and yes.
Uh-huh.
So yes, we need a staff, and yes, there's only one person.
Do Capitol Police Board obligations take your staff away from their other day-to-day duties because there is no Capitol Police Board staff other than this one person?
No, sir, but what we're talking about, maybe the three of us may be donating a person each that could support and maybe be a staff to
Okay.
provide that functionality.
Okay. Let me ask Mr. Blanton, do you think it's important that the frontline architect of the Capitol employees are aware of the threat environment on the campus?
I think it's important to where it can be shared, that the threat environment is shared with.
Are there policies or rules in place that would guarantee that AOC staff are made aware of the threat environment?
No, in fact, this is one of the challenges I see in the need to be in reform, where we overclassify information so that it can't be shared with people. And that goes from just law enforcement sensitive up to highest level of top secret classification. And that prevents it from being shared in mass.
So does your chief security officer provide threat briefings to other AOC executives and frontline workers?
Yes. So what she does is she takes something that's law enforcement sensitive and takes out the sensitive information and briefs it as a general information.
Okay. And finally, you in your testimony, you were talking about how on January the 6th, you were getting ready for the inauguration, doing stage your staff was working on stage preparations, and so on. So obviously it was not coordinated with any kind of security plan. Do you think that the security for January 6th itself should have been combined with the security and the planning for January the 20th? So that there would have been one security plan for that whole 2-week period?
So security for the inauguration is done by the Secret Service. And so it's their plan. For demonstrations that occur, First Amendment activity, that is conducted by the Capitol Police. So integrating those would be very challenging because the Secret Service is laser focused on securing the transition of power at that specific event.
I got you, but I mean, at least by the time we got to January 20th, nobody could get anywhere near the actual conduct of the program. Shouldn't we have had the same level of security precautions take place for January the 6th?
In retrospect, there was clearly a need for a greater security, but there was also, as been testified in many times by many organizations, there was no intelligence that was deemed credible or actionable. And so that prevented the security decisions that would have made a greater posture on campus.
Okay, thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for holding this hearing. As of a few weeks ago, we weren't sure that we would be able to have a hearing like this. I think it is very important that we do that. I applaud you for putting this together, especially when we're in a hyper-partisan environment, unfortunately, that we have here in Washington, D.C. right now. It's good that we can have a hearing that I think, for the most part, that will be a bipartisan effort to get to not only the truth, but also how we can avoid instances or incidents that happened on January 6th from ever happening again, especially when we've experienced a year of violence across this nation. It was very disheartening what happened on January 6th, and we need to make sure that the seat of our government of freedom is never attacked like that again. and I'm glad we're having this hearing as a testimony in recent hearings has revealed a host of concerns stemming from the lack of oversight and accountability of the Capitol Police Board. In fact, the Capitol Police Inspector General told me in a prior hearing that he did not believe there is any entity with responsibilities for oversight of the board because of its makeup of the House and the Senate Sergeant at Arms and the architect of the Capitol. With respect, that entity of oversight really should be this committee. And I'm glad that we are having at least this hearing at this moment. The events of January 6th brought to light how imperative it is that there is reform of the structure and the culture of the U.S. Capitol Police, its leadership, and the Capitol Police Board. And a lot of that is also expressed to me by individual members of the Capitol Police as well. While it's true that Mr. Blanton is the only member of the Capitol Police Board who was in office on January 6th, today marks an important step for this committee, especially to set the tone with our expectations going forward, and securing our Capitol should be a nonpartisan issue. Mr. Walker, congratulations. Thank you for taking on this post. It's very important. I knew the previous Sergeant at Arms that was serving up until January the 7th and worked closely with him on some issues. But I think it's important that we, members of the committee, really have an understanding of what the Sergeant at Arms is and the role. And could you maybe briefly describe what your daily responsibilities look like?
My daily responsibilities as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer for the House, and I believe my job is to make sure that you can come to work in a safe and secure environment, and your staff, and that this physical structure, and when you're back in your district, you're safe. I believe that's my role and responsibility to work in concert with Mr. Blanton and with General Gibson to make sure that we oversee the functionality of the United States Capitol Police.
Okay. And you and I had a brief opportunity to meet, I believe, in the hallway of Longworth. At one point, you were there with Rodney, is going around and checking on the troops there. And so I appreciate what you did in your previous role as a veteran myself. I know how important it is to have good, solid leaders in those positions. But this role is inherently different than where you were. And so getting up to speed in this position, were there resources, or what resources did you use to be able to get up to speed on this new position?
So I leaned on, and it was good to talk to you with you and Mr. Davis. I leaned on the experience of the people that are here. So the acting secretary after the departure of Secretary of Sergeant at Arms Irving, who I had known him as well. The federal law enforcement community is very small. I was an SCS with DEA when he was an SCS with Secret Service, so we crossed paths. I did know him, but I lean heavily right now on the team that I've inherited, and they're bringing me up to speed every day as a learning experience.
That team being the Capitol Police?
No, that team being Tim Blodgett, who was the acting Sergeant at Arms. He took over for Mr. Irving until I arrived.
Okay. So is he primarily the one who briefed you on your responsibilities as a member of the Capitol Police Board, not just the Sergeant at Arms?
Yes, sir, he did. I also talked to Mr. Blanton, and I talked to General Gibson.
Okay.
And I did some reading on my own.
Okay. Well, sometimes that's a good way to get a perspective of where it really should be, not necessarily the way it is. I appreciate that. It's my understanding that as you've gotten up to speed, you've fairly frequently met with the majority staff representing the speaker and the chair of this committee. How often are those interactions occurring?
So as needed, I make myself accessible. I'll run up and talk to, I haven't talked to the speaker lately, but I did speak to Mr. McCarthy this morning. I went up and visited him. So as needed, I'll go see anybody.
Okay. And that, I mean, it's good. Is the frequency of the majority and minority interactions there happening is
Yes, sir, they are.
okay.
Mhm.
And I know I'm out of time. I've got some more questions, and we can hit these on a second round if we have those. But has the majority or the minority either set any expectations as far as your performance and in your new role?
So results. So Mr. McCarthy, the speaker, they both made it very clear that they're all about the results. And I made it very clear I'm not going to fail.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And Madam Chair, I'll yield back for this round.
All right. Mr. Butterfield is recognized for 5 minutes. GK, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Why don't we get some tech support there? And let's slip to Pete Aguilar.
Testing.
There you go. Yep, we got you. Go ahead.
I didn't have my microphone on. I had my speakers on, but not my microphone. But thank you, Madam Chair, for your patience, and thank you for convening this important hearing this afternoon. This testimony is absolutely necessary for us to conduct our business in the future. And General Walker, thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony. I especially thank you for your many years of service to our country. And you know, while sitting here at the computer, listening and watching these proceedings, I did a little research on your background, General, and I was very impressed. I knew from news reports that you certainly have a distinguished career, but it appears that law enforcement has been your calling. It's been your life calling. And so from being a platoon leader with the 50th MP Company to your promotion to Major General by the former president and now our Sergeant at Arms. So thank you, sir, for your years of service. And to the architect, I won't make a speech about you, but Brett, please know that we all appreciate you as well. To you, General Walker, what qualities are you looking for in the next permanent police chief?
So, Congressman, what I'm looking for is this hybrid individual. I'll give you an example of a model that I'm looking at, and I've talked about this. A professional that has a security background, a law enforcement background, a public safety background, a first responder background. So when I was in charge of DEA New York, I worked closely with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. That individual is responsible for 4 airports, the PATH stations, the bus stations, the Holland Tunnel, the Lincoln Tunnel, the George Washington Bridge, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. So they have a police force, they have public safety, they have security, they have first responders. It's a hybrid, and they do close protection for some of their executives. So that's the kind of individual that I think would be the future, would lead the U.S. Capitol Police into the future with these compounding threats that are not disappearing.
Sure.
There's some sophisticated challenges, and I believe the next chief of police has to be more than a police professional, has to be an expert in a lot of things. Security,
Let me ask you this.
law enforcement.
How would a shift toward a protective services agency and away from a traditional law enforcement agency impact the search?
Well, it would broaden the search. So what I'm looking for, you still need the law enforcement. You have to have somebody with a law enforcement background or experience, but we need more than just that. You look at the major airports, Los Angeles Airport, who's in charge of that? They bring the law enforcement aspect. They still have law enforcement authority, but it's safety, it's security, it is force protection, it is physical security. It's not just people, but it's property, it's reputation, it's its infrastructure. It's just, it's a hybrid. And that's what the search, I believe that's what we need for the Capitol Police.
Thank you.
I need
Let me
more than
jump
just
over. Let me jump
police.
over to the architect. Brett, thank you so much for your testimony today, and thank you for all that you do for all of us. As you were planning for the January 6th joint session, was your office provided with intelligence, threat briefings from the Capitol Police?
No, we were not. We received some intelligence that was raw intelligence that we presented to the Capitol Police, but it was deemed non-credible.
Were you provided with a formal briefing from the Capitol Police intelligence director or even the deputy director?
No, I was not.
Did you request such a briefing?
No, my chief security officer, which is a position that I recently established, was receiving some intelligence and was doing hybrid briefings of that so that it go to my staff.
Thank you. Madam Chair, since Mr. Loudermilk went over 10 seconds, I'll give you back 10 of my seconds. I yield back.
Mr. Stiles is recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. I'd like to start off by asking Architect Blanton, if I can, about the staffing of the Capitol Police Board. You stated in your written testimony that the board needs a dedicated staff to be responsive to members of Congress, U.S. Capitol Police, and other law enforcement entities, and that currently the board is supported by staff who work for the AOC and the House and Senate Sergeant at Arms. For clarification, which of the board member staff currently provides staff support for the board? I understand the chief security officer may help the board from time to time, but are there others from your office or other offices of the other voting members who also assist?
So I'll answer directly about me, and then General Walker can talk about his staff, but it's really ad hoc support. There is one executive assistant on the Capitol Police Board, and then when there are issues that are related to the architect of the Capitol, typically within my chief security officer role, she will have some of her staff working the issues. There is a deputies committee, where my deputy would go, and sometimes my chief engineer, if it's will have to come in and support for some other construction.
So you'd say ad hoc support generally in your office?
Yes.
Okay. Did the Sergeant at Arms want to comment on his side?
So it's about the same. So our head of police services, one of my attorneys, the deputy sergeant at arms, we all come together to support.
Okay, thank you. So section 1901 of U.S. Code references an executive assistant for the board who's in charge of assisting with duties for the Capitol Police Board in fulfilling its duties. Does the board have an executive assistant? I'll start with Architect Blanton.
Yes, sir.
They do. Okay. And is this someone that's assigned from the board member staffs, or is this a separate position?
It is a permanent hired position.
Okay. If it and does this individual serve at the pleasure of the board?
I'll have to get back about the hiring and firing.
Okay.
You're going down that road.
Understood. I'm going to jump over to Sergeant at Arms Walker, if I can. Now that the Capitol Police Board has many responsibilities over Capitol Police, overseeing, managing, and administrating day-to-day activities right now, does this include the hiring of the police chief, correct?
Yes, sir.
As simple as choosing the uniform colors, I would think.
No, we wouldn't choose the uniform colors. I wouldn't do
Okay,
that.
so there's some level of distinction here as to how detailed you go. In particular, you'd be deciding to declare an emergency on campus, though that would come to you.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the board does all of that. I'm going to jump in. Have you reviewed the flash report from the Capitol Police Inspector General?
I haven't read it in detail, but I have read a lot of it.
Okay, very, very good. In the report, the U.S. Capitol Police Inspector General reported issues with previous recommendations either reemerging or never implemented at all. Some of these recommendations reemerged as part of the January 6th review. Could you describe your plan as a member of the Capitol Police Board for the board to consider some of these recommendations?
Well, so working collaboratively with Mr. Blanton and General Gibson, we will be visiting with the chief, the current chief and the next chief and the deputy chiefs to make sure what is recommended, you're gonna have to prove to me why we don't need it. Prove to
And so
us.
understood. So in particular, as it relates to some of the plans of the lapsed recommendations, if you will, those are things you'd consider being looked into in the future?
Oh, without question. And training, equipment, rehearsals. We
Okay.
have to implement those recommendations. I look at them as more than recommendations.
I appreciate that. In 2017, the GAO published recommendations for the Capitol Police Board to come into compliance with the leading governing best practices for transparency, accountability, and external communication. Can you confirm for the record that each of these are the roles and responsibilities of the Capitol Police Board? I just think it's important that we kind of have on the record what those are. So we said designing and installing and maintaining the security systems for the Capitol buildings and grounds.
Yes.
Issuing regulations governing the use of law enforcement authority by the Capitol Police Board,
Yes.
and designing emergency situations for the purpose of appointing special officers and accepting support services.
Yes.
All right. Recognizing that I am out of time, I'm going to hold some of my future questions, but really appreciate both of you being here. Hopefully we'll have the full Capitol Police Board able to attend at our next hearing. And with that, Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar, is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for being here. As my colleague just mentioned, the Capitol Police, the Inspector General published 3 flash reports since January 6th. These highlighted deficiencies in training as well as the police board's lack of planning leading up to the 6th, which eventually left my colleagues and other Capitol workers vulnerable during the attack on the Capitol. So my questions for both of you, did the Capitol Police Board, as you understand it, convene special meetings to hear directly from the Inspector General about his findings? General?
So we've got the report, but I have not met with the Inspector General. And I do look forward to sitting down with the IG and going over in detail. I have the report, but I want to go and get his recommendations, which, like I stated earlier, they're more than recommendations. These are things we have to implement.
Mr. Blanton?
So we as a board have not specifically had a standalone meeting regarding the IG's flash recommendations.
In the past, Mr. Blanton, has the board met with the IG to discuss, broader issues or more specific issues?
So the IG is invited to each Capitol Police Board meeting, and if there's an issue, the IG has his time to speak there, and quite often he'll be on the agenda with items to bring up. He, at the Capitol Police Board, provided quick overviews of the flash reports.
Would you consider that a best practice, that the IG is present at Capitol Board meetings and has an opportunity to be heard and to give feedback? Mr. Blanton first, and then the general.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I've only attended one meeting. He was there, and I found it insightful, useful. Wanted to continue.
General, should the Capitol Police Board conduct after-action reviews as a board for major events?
Should they do it? Yes, sir.
Mr. Blanton, is that your feeling as well?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Mr. Blanton, I wanted to talk specifically about your role, being the only person who was on the board prior to the 6th. In the report, is the ranking member said, one of the quotes that jumped out at me from the flash report indicated that the architect's role on the board has been disregarded for matters of campus security at large public events. That part was a quote. You know, how can the relationship with you and the Capitol Police, how can that be improved moving forward?
I can say it's drastically improved since the 6th. Admittedly, I do not have a law enforcement background, but I have a different perspective on looking at security. I have a military background. I've worked with military, police, security forces, combat security forces throughout my career. As an operational military engineer, we do a type of security-centric look at things. It's different than law enforcement. And so one of the areas where I thought the Capitol Police Board in its previous construct was of issue is the fact that it was made up of all law enforcement entities besides me. And so anything that was asked that was outside of a law enforcement lens was kind of disregarded.
Understood. Yeah. You talked in your testimony, your written testimony and your verbal testimony here about the campus-wide facility assessment that is being undertaken. And in your written testimony, it indicates that findings could be forthcoming in the next couple of weeks or months. Is that fair to say?
That is correct. There's going to be several interim reports that they're doing with going to be real quick hitters we can do. I'll say, for example, standard for interior security doors. I don't want to get into really the details about that, but we don't have a standard. There should be a standard. That's something we can do quickly to develop that standard so that we can then fabricate doors that architecturally look like they're the historic doors, but will provide safety to members.
How can you take the findings of that report and bring along the Capitol Police and encourage their feedback and perspective, much like the way they should encourage your perspective and feedback moving forward?
Thank you. I think that's a great question. One of the things that we're doing is the Capitol Police is a major stakeholder in this study. And it really starts with the beginning of the study when we were coming up with a agreed upon threat assessment. We're actually using DoD to help us support with the threat assessment. And then we coming up with a risk matrix, which includes the likelihood and consequence of an action happening so that we can do short-term mitigations. Part of the way I view this is we are going to be doing proposals that would change the physical space so that the operational space of Capitol Police can be modified. And what that would mean is they have to be in lockstep so that when we present the total ownership cost, we know upfront if we do this security modification, it could either reduce two personnel on post or add 2 personnel. So we have complete visibility of what these decisions have and what the effects of them are.
Gentlemen's time has expired. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And thank you for continuing our investigation into the institutional failures that were exposed by the events of January 6th. As highlighted in our recent hearings, outdated and in some instances non-existent intelligence and security procedures really left our rank and file officers without the training, information, and strategic planning needed to adequately respond to the events of that day. We're also learning about a troubling lack of reporting procedures and accountability measures. As the Capitol Police Board is ultimately responsible for oversight and efficacy of the department, we're trying to gain insight into how this body oversees the department so that we can understand the failings and prevent future Capitol attacks. Sergeant Walker, I'm sorry, Sergeant at Arms, Mr. Walker. I appreciated your testimony, particularly with respect to the need to support the rank and file of the Capitol Police in a manner that will enable them to succeed in a really complex mission. And I was taken with your analogy to the Port Authority. I have a brother-in-law who served with the Port Authority, and I think you do draw some interesting parallels there about the combination of the law enforcement and protective elements. I'll be interested to hear more about that. Can you advise us which executives within the department are responsible for ensuring that policies and procedures are updated with respect to employees and officers? And what is the police board's role with respect to developing and updating policies?
So the question is, who in the police, in the Capitol Police, is responsible for updating policy?
Within the department, what is the Capitol Police Board's role in updating policies and procedures that govern the U.S. Capitol Police activities? So to the extent we've heard that there weren't policies and procedures in place, what is the role of the Capitol Police Board?
So it's an oversight, is to provide the oversight, but what I'm looking for, and I talked to the current chief about an inspections division. So that would drill down into separate from the IG, but they don't have an inspections capability. I asked the chief about that, and she welcomed it. So I don't know if the inspections would be a part of the police board or part of the police, but wherever I work, we had inspections. We had an office of inspections that came out and verified that policies and procedures were being followed, and that we were looking for efficiencies and best practices and to optimize the organization. So going forward, I am looking for some type of inspections capability.
Okay. Do you see any modifications, or do you have any recommendations with respect to how we can improve the Capitol Police Board's communication and transparency with respect to our oversight obligations?
So so as the newest member, I can share with you, ma'am, is that Mr. Blanton, General Gibson, and I are committed to communicating regularly, frequently, meeting collaboratively. We have met, Mr. Blanton, I think we met Monday, didn't we? Yeah, the three of us were together Monday. We were together last week.
Okay.
So, and I don't think our predecessors, well, General Gibson's and I had that kind of regular, close and continuous contact. So we are moving with one voice, and our customer, you are the customer, and we are providing that oversight for the Capitol Police.
Okay. Mr. Blanton, you've spoken a little bit about the policies that do or do not exist. And I see from your testimony that there's a memorandum of understanding in the works with respect to the Capitol Police to identify roles and responsibilities. Is there a timeline for completion of that?
I know they're working rapidly on this, and this is really formalizing agreements that are currently, like for example, COG. There is a existing throughout the metropolitan Washington area. There is agreements with mutual aid. However, the Capitol Police is working diligently to have these formalized with executive agencies as well as other law enforcement agencies in the area. The deputies met just last Friday to start to review it. And I will say also that the administration and executive branch has been actively involved in supporting these agreements.
Okay. You mentioned
The gentlelady's time has expired. So could we wrap up, please?
Sure. I just had one more question. You mentioned that in the aftermath of the attack on the Capitol, there were mountains of debris that had to be removed by your staff. Was that debris processed by law enforcement, or was it just disposed of?
Everything that we collected, we presented to the FBI at their request.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I yield back.
The gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair Lofgren, for bringing our attention once again to the key issues about reforming the Capitol Police and improving accountability following the January 6th insurrection. I'm equally grateful to our witnesses for their insights on what we can do to address the structural issues that the violence the mob wreaked on us brought to harsh light on January 6th. General Walker, you previously testified that in your previous role, you didn't receive approval to mobilize troops until 3 hours after you requested it, and that the former Secretary of the Army withdrew your authority to deploy your troops. We know that the absence of the National Guard during the first hours of the pro-Trump attacks placed this Capitol, the members, the officers at risk of great harm. As our new Sergeant of Arms, you're recommending we move to a protective force today, and you also pledged to us today, and I truly appreciate the sincerity and the force of your pledge that you're going to take all necessary action to protect this institution. Can you explain what recommendations you may have so that this problem regarding securing National Guard assistance doesn't reoccur?
So thank you for the question, ma'am. I can share with you that the United States Capitol Police right now is training with the District of Columbia National Guard. And so we started that training. We're in almost the third month of USCP officers going to the armory and training in our tactics, techniques, and procedures, how we respond to civil disturbance and civil unrest, so that there is a shared common operating picture on what we're going to do, roles and responsibilities. Now, the Capitol Police will be in charge. We fall in on them. We're always in support. The National Guard is always in support. But so that's one thing. And what we're asking you, the lawmakers, to do is to empower the chief of the Capitol Police to be able to pick up the phone and call the commanding general of the District of Columbia National Guard and have that person, right now it's Major General McCandless, have her be able to send National Guard to the Capitol, be deputized en route so there's no delay, and tested on a regular basis, meaning what I call and clock. Call the DC National Guard and clock how long it takes to get there from a cold start on a bad day in the nation's capital.
Thank you. I'm also very concerned. I like the fact that there's training on it and then we're setting up and you've given us a task of what we can do to authorize that in Congress. I'm also very concerned about how the January 6th attack has taken a tremendous toll on the morale of your staff, of the Capitol Police. This afternoon, members of the Capitol Police sent a letter to members of Congress to express their profound disappointment with both chambers' minority leaders' comments regarding the January 6th Commission. And that letter talks about the harmful impact on the morale of officers to this day. Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter this letter into the record.
Without objection, it'll be entered in the record.
So I'm also especially concerned about the impact of the insurrection on the staffers of color that, we just heard the wonderful work that they did to bring back the Capitol so that we could do our job and inaugurate our president. In January, Business Insider documented the toll on these staffers. It said several Capitol janitorial and labor employees, all of whom were Black or Latino, told Insider they no longer felt safe at their workplace, and that they recounted the hurt of cleaning up after white nationalists who could have threatened their lives. Madam Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter this article into the record.
Without objection.
Architect Blanton, I really appreciate your recommendations regarding restructuring. Could you please share how that restructuring will address the concerns expressed by those Black and Latino and other staffers of color?
The restructuring of my organization?
Yes.
Okay. So after the events of January 6th, we've had a deliberate outreach to all of our employees that were here realizing that many of the staff that was cleaning up or going up to on the roof of the Capitol to reverse the flow were people of color. I can tell you in my talking with them that my staff is a very proud staff. They appreciate working at the Capitol. And when I did a virtual award ceremony for them where I gave them monetary awards for their time, it was very much appreciated by my entire staff. Also, we've opened up our employee assistance, so we have 24/7 counseling that is on the spot, confidential, and private counseling for anybody who needs it. And we have the ability to also to utilize some of the counseling services presented by the CAO. So we're really trying to use as a holistic approach to ensure the entire organization who is here in the Capitol, who may be feeling stress, who may have grief, are able to get the resources they need.
Thank you. My time is up. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'll now recognize myself for my questions. Mr. Blanton, you're the only witness who was actually here on the 6th, and I appreciate the timeline that you have provided to the committee, the 12-page timeline about the activities of the AOC Chief Security Officer, the CSO, relating to the January 6th attack. That timeline begins on December 28th and goes through January 7th. And it appears to show that the CSO and her team gathered or got open source information, including warnings of violence on the 6th. The AOC staff shared that information with the Capitol Police, but one of your staff, according to what you've submitted, then reported back that, quote, there is no talk about any credible threat of storming the Capitol after talking with Watch Commander Wisham and the House liaison here. Wisham said he would look through his emails and systems to make sure, and if there's any information, he'll forward it to us. In addition, your Chief Security Officer prepared a slide presentation for us, which I appreciate, and the presentation is dated January 5th. There's a slide, and it says, planned First Amendment demonstrations, January 5th. I think it's stunning. It talks about no specific known threats related to the joint session of Congress, but then right after that sentence, it says, there's a threat of weapons being introduced into demonstration activities. Henry Enrique Tarrio, leader of the Proud Boys, was carrying 2 high-capacity firearm magazines when arrested by MPD, social media postings and providing tips on how to secretly bring in weapons and ammunition to DC. Oath keepers and 3%ers who normally engage in armed protests plan to have weapons. There's also a threat of the Proud Boys and other groups going incognito. For example, the Proud Boys will all be wearing all black. Some demonstrators have announced plans to create mob violence to draw law enforcement to certain areas. So those statements right after no specific threat to the joint session seem inconsistent. And I'm wondering, well, the presentation also talks about a number of other ominous warnings. For example, a news article that's titled, quote, Gohmert talks of violence in streets after his lawsuit as dismissed, and other warnings like the threat of the weapons that I mentioned. Did your Chief Security Officer's briefing and its specific warnings raise concerns with you such that you personally raised them with either your fellow Capitol Police board members or with the Capitol Police? How did you reconcile the briefings you were getting from your Chief Security Officer prepared for you and your leadership team with the information you're apparently getting from the Capitol Police that there was no specific threat?
So I'll say with this, the AOC and the Capitol Police and really the Capitol Police Board are a consumer of intelligence, and the intelligence that was produced by DHS and as we've seen in the news reports as of late, was not analyzed properly. So that headline about no credible threat what came directly from an intelligence estimate. So that what my chief security officer did was took open source newspaper articles and highlighted those and some of the concerns mentioned in the newspaper articles. We then provided that to Capitol Police, who in return, when they looked at it, from my understanding, said that these are not credible. These are just news articles. And so in retrospect, it is.
Sure. Retrospect's 2020. We all know that. Did you personally engage with either the House or Senate Sergeant at Arms about the open source disconnect with what they were saying? Or did you attend the Cisco WebEx meeting hosted by Chief Sund with the joint law enforcement partners on January 5th?
I did attend that. The main purpose of that meeting was to discuss the inauguration. And
I see.
the threat on the inauguration. Chief Sund did say that that we do have a plan for the 6th, and it was a good plan, but that was the extent of the 6th that was brought up.
If I can mention, it sounds like, you know, the question before us is whether we change entirely the Capitol Police Board, or whether we augment and put some specific requirements and add some specific resources to the board, along with some, obviously, attention must be made, and everyone's attention is gathered here today. So I think this hearing will help focus on this question. We do have another panel that's been waiting for quite some time, and I would like to turn to them. I was just going to turn to you, Rodney. I know that you hope that we could have additional questions, and I would ask that we put our additional questions in writing to the witnesses, or we're going to lose the next panel.
I just respectfully disagree, Madam Chair. This is the first time we've had part of the board here. And my folks were banking on another round of questions. Talking about a second round beforehand and then pulling the rug out from under us in hearings.
Well, no, that's incorrect, Rodney. We never agreed to a second round of questions because we have two panels. And it was the 3 o'clock time that your staff suggested putting us in this posture.
I think it's an important hearing. I think it's important we investigate the events of January 6th. And I know the second panel is there. I know I have a witness on that second panel. I'm sorry. But pursuant to House Rule 11, Clause 2J, 2B, Committee Rule 9, Section E, I move to extend for an additional half hour the time for this committee to question these witnesses. If your side doesn't want to ask questions, it'll move pretty quickly. We'll do it equally divided for each side. I know Republican members of this committee have additional questions for these two members of the Capitol Police Board in front of us, and I would suspect your side may too.
Well, to be honest, I have not memorized the rule that you have cited. So we will be checking with our parliamentarians on that. For now, since our two witnesses are here in the Capitol and are not going anywhere, we'll ask that they remain here on call. Let's turn to our second panel so we do not lose them while we investigate the rule that you have cited, Mr. Davis. So we will, if that is acceptable, and I think that leaves the question open, we'll turn now to the second panel so we can hear from them. Linda Singh is the founder and chief executive officer of Kaleidoscope Effect LLC, a consulting and advisory company. She served as Major General in the Maryland National Guard and as Adjutant General and a Cabinet Secretary. She was responsible for the Maryland Military Department. Linda R. Williams is currently the professor of the practice at Middle Tennessee State University in the Department of Criminal Justice Administration and is the 43rd National President of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, or NOBLE, and remains a long-standing member of the Women in Federal Law Enforcement. the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and the National Council of Negro Women, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Ms. Williams began her service in the U.S. Secret Service in 1988 and held a number of positions until her retirement in 2017. Jeff Buchanan served in the United States Army for 37 years and commanded U.S. Army North 5th Army, retiring in 2019 as a lieutenant general. He's currently a senior fellow for the National Defense University and serves as a senior mentor for the Department of the Army. We will hear from each witness. Please do recall, witnesses, that your full written testimony will be made part of the record, and we ask that your testimony be limited to 5 minutes so we can get questions for you. And we do thank you for your patience. Ms. Singh.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Lofgren, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the committee. I first want to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. And while you have my written testimony, there's a number of things that I would like to highlight, not only from my written testimony, but also from some of the comments that's been made earlier, because I think they're completely relevant. The first piece is really getting to the culture of the organization. If we start looking at making wide sweeping changes without understanding the depth in which culture played a part in things not happening in the way that they should have on January 6th, then we will put in place another structure and the culture will remain the same. The key thing that we have to focus on is the Capitol Police Board is an oversight. Oversight, not operational. They are not supposed to be doing operational day to day if they are an oversight board. And so we have to look at the policies, procedures, and regulations that says what's the role of the Capitol Police Board. Because if they are oversight, we don't need another board to provide oversight on them. We need to be giving them direction as in what we are expecting of them, what we want them to manage, monitor, and report back on. The Capitol Police Board is your arm to be able to report back what is happening within the Capitol Police and what needs to happen. And so when we think about culture, even within the Capitol Police, the culture within the Capitol Police on January 6th is it was business as usual. There was not a sense of urgency. And we keep hearing about this credible information. I am sorry, but as a leader, when you get information and there is a threat, you have a responsibility. It is your role, it is your job to start figuring out what you need to do to ensure your people are ready to protect your customers. You shouldn't have to wait for someone to tell you. So when I think about culture, we have to change the culture of that force. That means if we're looking at changing them to a protection force, a force protection element, then we have to change their business as usual attitude. And that starts at the top. If we get to responsible leadership, if we look at the Inspector General's report, there are items that ticks and ties to the strategic plan of the Capitol Police. What's interesting is the strategic plan from 2021 that's supposed to go to 2025 has all of the right things in it. So what we need to do is to map what comes out of the Inspector General's report to the strategic plan, put metrics and measures in place so that the Capitol Police Board has oversight to be able to evaluate and to say what is being done and what is not being done. We have all of the information. We just have to make sure that we're following along the guidelines to make it happen. Now, I know General Walker, and I also know General Gibson. And I know as Army leaders and what they've been trained, and more importantly, looking at the years of experience, if we put our arms around them, give them the right expectations and guidance and the support, along with Mr. Blanton, we can bring this in line and we can make a change going forward. But we can't do the same thing that we've been doing for the last, I think Representative Davis says, for the 75 years. We have to change the culture going forward. The next piece that I'll get to, which was all through the Inspector General's report, is about communication. And we heard it here today. Communication is fundamental to leadership. And if you can't communicate up, and so, we have to look at how the Capitol Police is communicating to the Capitol Police Board. We have to look at how the Capitol Police Board is actually communicating to the broader population there on the Hill. If we are not ensuring that communication happens, then as a leader, we are failing. You have no tolerance for that. You should not have any tolerance for that. You are failing as a leader if you don't know how to communicate. That is all through the Inspector General's report. And I would say that the training, the culture, and the fundamental structure of the organization has to be challenged, has to be pushed. And so with that, I'm going to kind of stop there because I know that I'm out of time, but I am very passionate about ensuring that this doesn't happen again and that we protect you, our members, we protect our House, and more importantly, we uphold what the Constitution tells us we need to be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Singh, and I'll turn now to Professor Williams. You are recognized. You need to unmute your microphone, however. Thank you.
There I go. Committee Chairperson Representative Zoe Lofgren and Ranking Member Representative Rodney Davis, and the members of the United States House Committee on House Administration, I bring you greetings on behalf of the Executive Board, members and constituents of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, NOBLE. I am Linda Williams, National President, Professor of Practice of Criminal Justice at Middle Tennessee State University, and retired Deputy Assistant Director and Chief Security Officer for the United States Secret Service. I've served for more than 30 years in the law enforcement profession. It is an honor for NOBLE to provide written testimony on today's topic, and I'm honored to participate in this ongoing, important work of root cause analysis and remedies to strengthen the leadership and tactical posture of the U.S. Capitol Police Force, to ensure the safety and security of our democracy, the stewards of our democracy embodied in our congressional representatives, the many visitors, staff, and facilities. Like you, I watched in horror as the events of January 6, 2021 unfolded and devolved into what has been appropriately described as a domestic terrorism attack on our country's democratic process, and more directly, an all-out assault on the men and women of the U.S. Capitol Police Force and the U.S. Congress. The aftermath of January 6 brought many questions, direct scrutiny regarding the department's processes, protocols, and methodology around intelligence gathering and dissemination, their operational and tactical procedures, their capacity and compliance to training, as well as leadership oversight and accountability. Subsequent to the events of January 6, U.S. Capitol Police Department Office of Inspector General produced 2 flash report assessments, which identified a myriad of lapses in foundational, situational awareness, threat assessment protocols, tactical emergency response capability, a lack of baseline standardization of training, and an inappropriate alignment of manpower adequate for their mission. Continuing, the 2 reports yielded no less than 34 recommendations, mainly related to redefining the operational readiness for the Capitol Police Department's Civil Disturbance Unit, or its intelligence gathering and dissemination apparatus, understanding that the lack of operational readiness and tactical breakdowns were the most glaring deficiencies on display on January 6th, and therefore have received the brunt of what's being highlighted. First, a priority must be placed on the responsibility, oversight, and governance of leadership's role in the manifestation of these deficiencies. Often, when there is a breakdown or a mishap in operations, the first casualty is the lack of funding for a program. Lack of funding begets misaligned resources, begets scaled down procedures, begets non-compliance of SOP, and on until the weakened process becomes the problem, and instead of the decisions that created that weakened process. The continuation of the root cause analysis that is to take place in this and future hearings must end this cycle of attempting to just fix process without fixing accountability of leadership and governance oversight, and redefining the role of the U.S. Capitol Police Force, a shift in the paradigm and operations of a law enforcement agency versus a federal protective service must be holistically evaluated. The morale and sentiments of those who battled arduously on January 6th should be considered in this assessment as this agency moves forward. Upon my reflection, I am empathetic to the mindset of those officers who must report to duty after such a horrendous and unfathomable day in our country history. I pray daily for each individual traumatized and permanently scarred by those events. That as time massages the pain, the physical scars are less and the mental anguish diminishes. George Santayana is credited with the famous quote, "Those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it." The congressional leadership and others with oversight of the U.S. Capitol Police Force owe these officers the structural foundation, funding, training, resources, and continued support to redefine the core values of their beliefs of how they conduct themselves in work and interaction with professionalism, pride, and effectiveness. Thank you.
Very much, Professor. Now we'll turn to our last witness, General Buchanan. You are recognized.
Madam Chairperson, Ranking Member Davis, and members of the committee, I served as Deputy Leader for the Capitol Attack Review Task Force. And our task force submitted our report and made more than 120 recommendations in early March. In my comments today, I'd like to focus on 3 topics: reformation of the Capitol Police Board, a recommendation for the U.S. Capitol Police to shift its focus from law enforcement towards force protection, and the need for cultural change in the Capitol Police to become a learning organization. Regarding the Capitol Police Board, its processes may work well for routine decisions such as resource allocation, but they can be challenged in a crisis such as we saw on January 6th. Our task force recommended changes to the law so that the chief of police could initiate movement for augmentation without waiting for the Capitol Police Board to vote to declare an emergency. We also recommended a change so that the chief of police could appeal denials of requested support in non-emergency situations to the leadership of the House and Senate. I believe that with these changes and sound leadership, unity of effort for security functions, even in a crisis, is possible. True unity of command, however, will not occur without a restructuring of the police board itself. And I do think that that's worthy of consideration. Second topic was force protection. Though force protection is the stated mission of the Capitol Police, our observations and much of the feedback that we received was that they spend a lot of time and energy on law enforcement tasks. Force protection and law enforcement are not mutually exclusive. But if officers spend a lot of time on law enforcement tasks that have little to do with force protection, the quality of the force protection will eventually erode. I'm not arguing that we should ignore violations of the law on or near Capitol grounds, but force protection should be the underlying purpose in all of the Capitol Police's actions. What the Capitol Police are saying is not necessarily matching what the Capitol Police are doing. I think a short example, a quick example may be helpful, and I'll focus on dignitary protection. I assume that most of the members of this committee have received threats in the past. If I'm focused primarily on force protection, I'm going to do everything I can to dig into those threats, work with local law enforcement, brief family members, and do absolutely everything I can to prevent an attack. If I'm concerned primarily with law enforcement, always in my mind will be the collection of evidence that I may be able to take to court someday to prosecute a criminal. A shift in the underlying purpose from law enforcement to force protection would enable the Capitol Police to better understand evolving threats, predict attacks, and adopt an effective posture before, during, and after crises. My last topic is the need to change the culture of the Capitol Police to becoming a learning organization. In my judgment, the Capitol Police do not value training, learning, or organizational improvement. At the individual level, The Capitol Police paid its employees for 720,000 hours of overtime last year. And that's a trend that's lasted for a number of years. Aside from being both inefficient and expensive, that amount of overcommitment leads to a lack of available manpower for training. Without training at the individual, leader, and collective levels, the Capitol Police cannot maintain proficiency, let alone improve. As I understand it, there still has not been a series of comprehensive after-action reviews in the wake of the January 6th attack. After-action reviews are common practice in most military and law enforcement organizations, and we debrief our officers after every critical incident. As far as I understand, this still has not happened to any great extent in the Capitol Police. Without an honest, self-critical approach to organizational improvement, the Capitol Police will never learn and grow. Such a mindset will only be produced by a fundamental change in culture. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
I think you're on mute, Zoe.
Thank you very much to the two generals and the professor. Now is the time when members ask each one of you questions. I'll turn first to our ranking member, Mr. Davis.
Just a point of clarification, ma'am. Madam Chair, did we get a clarification on my previous motion?
Well, I don't think you made a motion, but if you did, it is a misreading of the committee rules and the House rules. The committee may adopt a rule allowing for extensive, beyond the 5-minute questioning. The committee has not done so, and the House rules make that permissive. So your motion to compel additional questions is not supported by the rules. And I do think it's unfortunate to try and go into, you know, a rule-based compelling when we should have a discussion. I would like to ask these witnesses who have volunteered their time very patiently for several hours to show them the courtesy of asking them questions at this time.
Madam Chair, I certainly look forward to sitting down with you, which we haven't done in a while, and actually talking about courtesy, notification, preparation, what the hearing's going to be like, how many rounds of questioning. It's a very frustrating point for me, especially after 76 years, we get partial board. I think there are more questions. We'll submit them for the record, but I will register my disappointment and also continue to have to do things like this until we can sit down and come up with agreements. I will move into this, Mr. Stile, or actually, I'll go. Mr. Buchanan, I really appreciate you being here. You have been great to work with since your time since we chatted on General Honoraries Commission. And I want to start off by asking General, how have police organizations changed since 9/11?
I think a great example is the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, which was a subject of the attack on 9/11. But in the wake of that attack, they stood up the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, which had not existed. They invited the Department of Defense Threat Reduction Agency to come in and do a comprehensive assessment to look at all current and potential future threats. And then they built their entire system with a force protection mindset, integrated alarm sensors, how they control personnel, how they maintain access throughout the campus. So that's one example that has changed. And obviously you can look at the creation of Department of Homeland Security, TSA, there's many, many examples out there.
Well, I mean, specifically, can you tell us how do agencies look at threat levels? Obviously, through discussion, through your work on the commission, through public information, we've seen that there was really a downplay of the threat analysis that we saw with the Capitol Police. Some of your recommendations in the report reflect that. As a matter of fact, the briefing I received the day before January 6th gave me no indication at all that anyone in the Capitol Police would have expected to see what we saw on January 6th, especially knowing now that intelligence was relayed from the Norfolk FBI office to the Capitol Police Intelligence Division. So with that, can you give me an indication based upon what we know about the Capitol Police and what we know about the Capitol Police Board? What can we learn from other offices, other police agencies and organizations throughout the country to make sure that we don't see the mistakes that we saw leading up to and on January 6th?
Thank you, Ranking Member Davis. I think that the key is in my third point, which is they have to become a learning organization. They've got to step back after every incident, after every training event. They should look hard at themselves and figure out what did we do well, what did we not do well, how can we learn from this, how can we learn from adjacent law enforcement agencies, other organizations, intelligence organizations to improve our processes. And without such a open, self-critical approach, they'll never get better. What they haven't done is taken that hard look. Our task force even offered to facilitate the conduct of after-action reviews, and that was never acted on.
Well, thank you. I know it's been referenced, some of the recommendations put forth by General Walker referenced that maybe we need to do a non-badged force with the Capitol Police that would model the TSA. Many of us, I love our TSA agents. Many of us who've been through airports a lot may not want to use that model to explain what that secondary non-badged force would look like. Can you explain what you view based upon your recommendations, even with the Honorary Commission, you being a part of? What type of protective force do you see operating on the Capitol complex that would allow the goals of every one of us to be achieved, to make sure that we never, ever again see the failures that we saw leading up to and on January 6th?
So first of all, commenting on General Walker's comments, I think he hit the nail on the head. I don't think we need to have 5 badged officers watching a single entry, and a magnetometer. Maybe you have 1 or 2 in oversight and a number of civilian employees. That could buy back some of the manpower problems that they have. But more importantly, I think it's this mindset that force protection has to underlie everything that we do. I mean, if our officers are busting teenagers for smoking marijuana over at the train station, I mean, I know that's against the law, but if that doesn't have anything to do with protecting the Capitol or its members, it's probably wasted time and energy. And so it requires a cultural change. It has to start at the top, but more importantly, has to be driven by our actions every day.
General, you are 100% correct. And you mentioned actions and decisions that start at the top. You want to talk about where we can make sure that our men and women, the Capitol Police, get the rest and get what they need to be able to recover from what they experienced on January 6th. You know as well as I do, there are many instances where politics are coming into play, where there are no known threats in the Capitol building, but our men and women, brave men and women, the Capitol Police that need that break, need to go home to see their families, unfortunately, are actually having to man stations within the Capitol that have absolutely nothing to do with the internal external threats. General, thank you for being our witness today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you again. Look forward to doing so. And the rest of our witnesses, I apologize I don't have time, and clearly I'm not going to get a second chance to ask questions later. So thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Raskin is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General Singh?
Yes, sir.
General, are you there? Hello and welcome from Maryland. We're delighted to have you here. What do you think the Capitol Police Department should do to transform the training, the leadership, and the cultural problems identified by the Inspector General in his reports and his previous testimony before the committee?
Absolutely, sir. Well, thank you for asking that. The first thing that I would do if I was sitting in that seat, and I'm not, but I'm just saying if I was, I would highly recommend that they do assessment of their organization to understand the cultural issues. I mean, they already know what's been said by the report, but you really need to get a deeper understanding of your people. What are their capabilities? As you're starting to look at moving them to a force protection element, you still need to look at your people, because you have to know, okay, who do I have in place, and are they going to be able to do those jobs? If they are not the right people, you're going to have to start either one, getting them the training, or two, moving them out. Because when you think about changing organizations, it's more than just standing up a structure. It is about, the people you have, the leaders you have, are they experienced enough? And then are they going to be motivated enough to actually move into that force? And I agree that they have to have a training mindset. When I sit there and think of all the things in their strategic plan, it starts with leadership. It starts with training, which is a leader's responsibility to ensure their force is trained. It also is a leader's responsibility to ensure that they know their organization, know the shortfalls, and know how they're going to move them forward.
Well, I appreciate that because, we've detected some remarkable deficiencies as identified by the Inspector General, and a force that wasn't prepared in a lot of ways. And it was not fair to the people on the line to send them into what was really battle without the proper physical equipment, without the proper training, without the proper coordination. And it was really a catch-as-catch-can situation. In your role as Adjutant General of the Maryland National Guard, you helped lead the response to the 2015 Freddie Gray protests in Baltimore. What lessons did you learn that could apply to the Capitol Police when dealing with major civil disturbances?
Well, it's a great thing to reflect on. And General Walker and I talked about this quite a bit when we were going through this. And
I should say, I don't mean to equate those two things. I mean, we had an organized violent insurrection and a coup that's essentially taking place here. But nonetheless, you learned a lot from it.
Absolutely. And there were a lot of parallels, right? So first off, equipping of our force. Baltimore City Police was not equipped. They did not have the right equipment. They did not have the right training. And so some of the underlying issues and challenges were very much the same. And so what we started doing as a result of that, we, the National Guard, is started training more with our police forces, making sure that our practices and our techniques and our operations and our policies were more aligned when we were more likely to work together. The other thing that we started doing is, or at least I started doing, is meeting with all the chiefs. So all of the chiefs of the large departments, I started meeting with them on a regular basis because I did not want to show up at a crisis and not know who they were. Because when you have a crisis that hits, it's the relationships that's going to carry you through that. And if you don't have the right relationships, you can't build them at the moment that the crisis hits, because that's really where it's going to break down. And so we started really looking at how can we leverage one another when we're not in the midst of a crisis, when we're in normal operations. How can we train more together? And even today, if you were to go and ask the folks in Baltimore City, the Baltimore City Police Department, as well as the Maryland National Guard, you will find that they continue to do things together because that's where we are able to really respond a lot more efficiently.
And does that point apply as well to the National Guard, that there should be pre-existing relationships that are built up over time with the Guard?
Absolutely, that definitely. I mean, I did not want to show up because what happened in Baltimore is that, I had relationships in Baltimore City already. The state police superintendent, I already knew Bill, even though he had only been, in his role for a very short period. We were cabinet secretaries together. And so we started spending more time together. And there's one thing on this whole thing of information that was really a lesson, and why we were able to respond a little bit different in Maryland than, what you've seen happen. And there were a number of things that were at play at the Capitol, right? But this is one piece that I think we absolutely have to make a point of, is they showed up in my office several days before the civil disturbance hit on that Monday. And when I say they, that was the emergency manager lead, as well as the superintendent of the Maryland State Police. And we started talking about the information that they were seeing, the trending that they were seeing. And that gave us pause. So therefore, we as leaders said, we need to figure out what can we do to be ready in the event that something hits, which is what we did.
Thank you very much, General Singh, and I yield back to you, Madam Chair.
The gentleman from Georgia is now recognized.
No, thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll get right into the questions. General Buchanan, thank you for your service and for what you have been doing as part of this task force. In your written testimony, you mentioned that the Capitol Police last year paid its officers more than 720,000 hours of overtime. How did we get into this position?
I think it was a lack of hiring over the years. And I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are now, but as of early March, they were 233 officers short of what they were authorized. And in our estimation, they were short, their authorizations were short of what they should have. So they had few manpower, or a little bit of, or a lacking of manpower. And then, as I just described, when we have badged officers gathered in groups doing things that may not require badged officers, that requires a lot of overtime.
So do you think this high amount of overtime has affected the Capitol Police ability to adequately protect members and staff and maybe had an impact on the morale of the force?
Yes, sir, I sure do. Aside from being committed a lot, like I mentioned, they don't have time to train. And if they don't have time to train, they can't stay in touch with evolving tactics. Most police forces around the country have spent over the last 5 years, have learned a lot from what's been happening across the country. And they spend time and energy on de-escalation and things like this. Those sorts of evolving tactics, as far as I understand, have not been trained across the force because they don't have available manpower.
So now that we're on the subject of training, aside from having more time for training, how should the Capitol Police improve the way it trains officers?
Well, I think it starts with leader training. This is one thing that also has not been valued. They're unlike most of the other law enforcement agencies in Washington, D.C., that routinely exchange officers across the force. They learn from other agencies and then bring the best practices to their own organization. That has not been a routine practice, at least at a large scale in the Capitol Police. But we need to invest in our leaders and start with the leaders. Like General Singh mentioned, it's training and responsibility for training and learning starts with the leaders. So I think we really have to focus there. So
of the over 120 recommendations that your task force made in its report, which of the recommendations will be the most difficult to implement given the current structure of the Capitol Police Board?
Sir, I'll take on the board itself. I think it's relatively easy to change to U.S. Code 1970 and 1974 for emergency procedures so that the chief of police can ask for help without getting the board to vote. If, however, we're going to look at restructuring the board itself, that would be very difficult. And it's really because of the bicameral nature of Congress. I'm not a historian. I know the board was established in 1873. I believe the reason it has the structure it does is because of the sharing of power. But I think it's worth thinking about bringing in a single person where you have both responsibility, authority, and accountability all together in the same person who's responsible for security. How do we get that person? I am not sure. I mean, are we going to reach out to the executive branch to appoint somebody? I'm not sure that Congress wants to give up that authority. So I'm not sure how we get there, but I think it's worth thinking about.
Well, and I think many of us would like to see us move in a direction to where there's a limit on the political influence over the decisions, and the decisions are made on force protection alone. And I think that would be a great direction to go. I'm running short on time, but in your assessment, what do you think is the most important first step towards the Capitol Police shifting its primary focus towards force protection? What is the most important first steps to do that?
Well, I think obviously it starts with the leadership, as does training. It already says it in our mission statement, but we have a mismatch between the audio and the video. What we're saying is not what we're doing, and we just have to live up to it. But it starts with leadership, goes top down and at the same time bottom up. How do we reinforce actions? When an officer does something that is aligned with force protection, are we providing positive reinforcement, even if we didn't write a ticket? Right?
So-
And so I think our actions count more than our words.
One last question. Why do you believe the Capitol Police hasn't conducted comprehensive after action reviews in the wake of January 6th?
Well, again, I think it's counter to their culture. I think that they have not valued learning. They have not encouraged candor. You know, you can't find an infantry company in the Army or Marine Corps where a Lance Corporal or a private first class is not willing in an AAR to stand up and say, here's a bad decision the company commander made. But we encourage that. We encourage that candor. And that culture does not exist in the Capitol Police.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you for your service for all the panelists there, and I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I would note that a vote has been called on the House floor. We do have a little bit of time before the vote closes out, so I hope that all the members can have time to ask their questions. I will ask people to try and stay within their 5 minutes. And Mr. Butterfield, you are next.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I will definitely stay within my 5 minutes. And thank you to the three witnesses for your testimony this afternoon, and thank you for your patience. Let me start with Linda Williams. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Please give my best wishes to Noble. We have many Noble members in North Carolina and definitely in my congressional district, and so thank you for the work that you do.
Yes, sir.
I'm informed, Ms. Williams, that the Capitol Police lacks a codified leadership development program and a training program. Based on your experience with the service, should the department move to a protected service agency model? How critical is it that they have a codified leadership development and training program? That's my question.
It's very essential, like it has been stated, from the top down. But if we're going to change it from a law enforcement organization until a protective, there has to be a full assessment and look at the missions. And then you align the hierarchy and those prescribed positions with qualified people that the training aligns with what that new mission is. And then there has to be a check and balance of those personnel that are given to that to ensure, even in times of low funding, that training is paramount, because how one trains is how one responds. So we have to look at a total assessment if we're going to shift the mission of this organization. Make sure that it is clear that even those current men and women that came into this organization as a law enforcement organization are made aware, and let them have some feedback as they transition into this, because they are the men and women out there every day. So we have to look at a totality of everything of how we're going to redefine that mission and that organizational structure.
Thank you. You have many years of distinguished service with the Secret Service. What advice would you give to a rank and file police officer, a Capitol Police officer, who wants to follow the same path that you have followed and move to the department's Dignitary Protection Division?
I would tell them to put their all in it, ask questions, ask for the training, ask for feedback. If they're not getting it, ask, who do I go to? Know what you're doing and what you're aligned to do. And of course, hold yourself accountable. But, go to those supervisors that are tasked to be supervisors, to oversee what responsibilities that you have been assigned to. And if you feel that you're falling short of that, then you need to reassess that organization, your status there, and even if that's not the organization for you, but there has to be accountability. Everyone has to account for someone and their actions, and there has to be some feedback and evaluations and in-service training and continual communication, open communication, that from the lowest person to the highest person, they know exactly how this organization operates and what opportunities there are for them.
Well said. Thank you. And to you, General Singh, and thank you for your many years of service. Have you had an opportunity to review the Capitol Police's strategic plan? Have you had a chance to look at it? If so, what is your assessment of that plan?
I have had the opportunity, sir, to look at the strategic plan. And here's the challenge: is the strategic plan has all of the right pieces and parts in it, but most leaders do not know how to take a strategic plan, operationalize it, and then communicate it down to the lowest level. That is usually where most organizations just fail. They take the strategic plans and they go, oh, it's done, and we put it on the shelf. And so if someone was to come in, the first thing is looking at that strategic plan, looking at those IG reports and saying, what do we have in our strategic plan that's going to map to that? Those would be some simple steps that they could do and start moving in that direction.
If the department were to move to more of a protected services agency model, would the strategic plan need to be amended?
Absolutely. The strategic plan would have to be amended. But what's interesting is there are parts in the strategic plan that says they are a force protection agency. And so, the things aren't aligning. And that's where I think there's a huge challenge. And I agree with Ms. Williams is that they have to do an assessment. That has got to be the first and foremost thing. If we just say they're going to be a force protection element, it won't happen without taking them through some regimented steps that says, how are we moving from point A to point B?
Thank you. That's very clear. General Buchanan, we've run out of time, but thank you, sir. Thank you for your patience, and thank you as well for the service that you've rendered to our country. I yield back, Madam Chair.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Stile is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Appreciate you having today's committee hearing. I would have loved the opportunity to have a second shot at, in particular, with our Capitol Police Board, or at least the portion that made the hearing. For the record, though, I would like to submit for the record House Rule 11, Clause 2J, 2B, and Committee Rule 9E. I'll park the rest of my comments on that because we just got a great panel. If those can be submitted for the record, though.
Sure, without objection.
All right, so let's dive in if I can. General Buchanan, I appreciate you being here today. We've spoken about the Capitol Police transitioning towards being a protective force. Could you quickly provide examples of how we should model the Capitol Police in your opinion?
I gave a couple of examples in the outcomes, with what we're spending our energy on, but I think it starts from the beginning. And I think we heard from board members in the first panel about asking for help from DOD, probably DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, to come in and help us understand what are the threats that the grounds face, what are the threats that the members face, and now, and maybe even more importantly, into the future. We can't be myopic and just look back on 6 January and then build the force to deal with those threats.
Understood. And as you look at that, how would you think of what that transition would take, and what are those pitfalls that we should look for?
Well, one of the, again, one of the things is to understand what those threats are and what the potential is. Some of the pitfalls is that we fall in love. I think sometimes we end up falling in love with the solution without really understanding the problem. And I'll just give you a quick example without going into a lot of detail. It has to do with our sensors and alarm systems that we have around the Capitol today. It's a series of good ideas applied over time, but the result is what we have is we have a lot of systems that are not connected, that are not tied together. They were a good idea 10 years ago, then 5 years ago, but what we don't have is a comprehensive system that actually makes the best sense to protect the force today.
Appreciate that. There's obviously been a lot of bureaucracy involved in the decision-making, in particular as related to the January 6th events. We've heard a lot of conversations about this. In your experience, have you seen a police force or a protective force with a model similar to the United States Capitol Police, in particular the United States Capitol Police Board?
I have not, but please recognize I'm not a dedicated law enforcement
No, but in
professional.
your opinion, that's fine. You haven't seen it. I think it's worthwhile for all of us on this committee, the elected members of Congress on this committee, that should note that if it hasn't been used elsewhere, in your short analysis, you haven't seen it. Maybe we shouldn't be using it here either. It appears the Capitol Police were not permitted to make some important decisions on January 6th, in part because of the slow process of the Capitol Police Board. Looking at that, should the police chief have authority without board pre-approval to call backup in an emergency, in your opinion?
I do think that he currently has the authority to request augmentation from agencies that already have jurisdiction. So for example, he can call for help from Metropolitan Police Department, U.S. Secret Service, but he can't go to the National Guard, and he also cannot swear in emergency officers without a vote and declaration of emergency by the police board. And this is one of the changes we recommended.
Okay, so those are some of those changes that you think we could do to ensure decisions are more efficiently made, in particular in the case of emergency?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so as I said at previous hearings, to me, it appears that the Capitol Police Board's operated as a political body and not really as a nonpartisan law enforcement entity. And this is obviously a political place in the United States Capitol, but security isn't partisan. Question for you is, how do we really solve that issue? How do we take the partisanship out of the Capitol Police Board, in your opinion?
Well, I think, you know, there's value in the police board for what it does for routine decisions. But I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think it's worth considering bringing the responsibility, accountability, and authority for security actions together in one person. And, you know, that's a different model, but if somebody can stand up and say the buck stops with me at all times for these security decisions, I think you'll get, you don't have to worry about consulting with yourself to conduct a vote.
Thank you very much. Thanks
So
for your time here. Cognizant of the time, I'll yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Aguilar, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. General Singh, one of your main areas of focus when serving on General Honore's Capitol Security Task Force was member security. And I've spoken to many of my colleagues who have expressed concerns about their physical safety on the Capitol complex following January 6th. This sentiment has been echoed by congressional staff members and staff associations and essential workers that keep the Capitol operating. Could you summarize some of the key findings and recommendations with respect to the member security portion of that report? And I guess the next question would be, you know, would a protective service agency be more effective at providing member security than a reactive law enforcement agency?
Right. And yes, sir. And thank you for recognizing that. There are a couple of things that we looked at. The first piece was overall dignitary protection teams and what it would take for realignment or being able to surge dignitary protection teams in the event that they needed to. That whole process has to be really fleshed out and looked at, because the key thing that they focus in on is threats, right? Or at least risk to members. And I want to say risk versus, in some cases, threats. And so one of the things that we recommended is that they need to really create a risk model, right? A risk profile for members so that they know what's, you know, what could be causing, I hate to say causing, but, you know, for a particular member, you know, what's their risk profile? Do they need to have more security? Do we need to coordinate more with locals? Should we be tracking more? Should we make the member aware of, you know, what's going on and what's coming in? And then what are the members seeing? So the risk profile and how the dignitary protection teams get assigned was one piece of it. The other piece was member travel, member security at the district office, as well as their residence. And so part of what I'm now doing with the House side is looking at those processes. How do we make those processes more efficient and then more member-centric? And when I say member-centric, a member is actually going home. Like if they're going to go on travel, there's a form that gets filled out really on the House and the Senate side. Those are manual processes. We're actually saying they fill in a form and then somebody is tracking that pretty manually. So how do we improve that process for the member staff, for the members themselves? And then looking at their security systems. How do we improve our ability at, you know, from the sergeant at arms level to be able to track all of those pieces and to know that if a member has improved their security system, we know what that is. And so it really is trying to make things a lot more efficient for member security, giving more information to the members or at least the member staff so that they can see, you know, if something increases my risk profile, well, what would that be? And knowing that not all members are going to want to have that same level of specificity. So we have to make sure that we're considering that across the board as well.
I appreciate your service on the commission and your work and your answer there. Madam Chair, I'll yield back in the interest of time.
Yields back. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And did we lose Ms. Williams? We did.
She
Okay. General Sinji, if you wouldn't mind addressing one issue I wanted to take up. When Inspector General Michael Bolton testified before this committee that on January 6th, officers failed to adequately report stop or contact activities. Are you familiar with that term?
Sorry, what was it? You failed to report
stop or contact activities. So the observation of suspicious or unusual activity by rank and file, and that didn't happen. Do you have any thoughts on how rank and file officers should go about collecting intelligence and then communicating up the chain of command?
Well, I mean, this plays right into looking at their overall, culture. The culture is that we allow everyone to come into the Capitol. We're not really going to stop them. We're just going to send them through the normal procedures. And that is really, some of what they were doing that day. I don't think that they could understand, where do we draw the line? What should we allow happen and what shouldn't we? And what should be occurring or should have been occurring at that point, when they started seeing it escalate, they should have said, okay, this is now a point in which it crosses the line. I'm sorry, you have to go. And they needed to shut the doors, right? And I know that that's easier said than done. But when I look at making sure that they understand where that demarcation point is, when is it that I can say, no more, you need to stop. You have now crossed the line. I don't think that they understand that. It's not in place. And so we have to deal with those fundamental cultural type things.
Okay, and training too, I assume.
And training, absolutely. Because I think, part of it is if you're not training, right, what you see them doing every single day is what they train on.
Right.
So therefore, that's part of their normal business.
One more quick question. We've heard that the Capitol Police are currently 233 officers shy of the number of officers authorized. We've heard a lot about the fact that they don't have adequate additional personnel for training. The overtime is off the charts, et cetera. Do you have suggestions to help improve recruitment? And keeping in mind that, kind of what we're hearing on the street now is in the wake of January 6th, we're probably going to lose even more officers.
Yeah, I mean, first off, you've got to take care of that force.
Yes.
Leadership has got, this is paramount. This is where good leadership comes into play in terms of taking care of your overall force and your structure. You are going to lose some in terms of retention. We're seeing that. It may not necessarily be just tied to 1-6. We're seeing that across the country for all law enforcement. And so part of, what they need to be thinking about doing is, how are we going to start giving more training? How are we going to start changing the way we leadership deal with our folks and really start helping them to get what they need? And if we can't get them to step forth from a leadership perspective to do that and really understand what's the lowest line person need to be able to do their job, then we're going to lose them time and time again. And some of that is about accountability. It's about metrics and measures. Just as much as we're telling them they have to be accountable to us, they also have to be accountable to measure their folks, to reward their folks, to make sure they're getting training. Training is more than just what they need to do their job. It is something that helps an individual kind of raise their level of performance. And so we need to be doing those things across the board. And it starts with leadership, right? And it has to go all the way down.
Well, I appreciate that. And if you have further suggestions on what we can do to support our Capitol Police Force, because we are very grateful to them and know that they've been through a lot. So thank you, and I yield back.
The Congresswoman from New Mexico is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so very much. General Buchanan, as we saw firsthand on January 6th, domestic violent extremism and racially motivated violent extremism on the rise in the United States. How does this rise impact your analysis about shifting the department from traditional law enforcement to protective services agency?
Thank you, ma'am. I think if we go back to 9/11, we did a lot of things in the wake of 9/11, given what the threat we saw at that time. And in some ways, a number of our law enforcement agencies haven't really changed over the years, but we were focused primarily on external threats. And, as the way I look at it, when one is trying to use violence or the threat of violence to intimidate others and have a political outcome, that looks a lot like terrorism. Whether the source of that terrorism is domestic or external, I think that's what we're dealing with.
Right. So in terms of the Protective Services Agency, we're dealing with terrorism. It seems to me then that that the Protective Services Agency approach is going to be better suited for that, right? But that there is also a certain level, and maybe it's not the kids or whoever is smoking marijuana at Union Station, but that there is some law enforcement role as well. Are they mutually or exclusive, or how does an organization handle both potential aspects?
Ma'am, no, they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, a lot of times you could be doing law enforcement tasks, but if your overall purpose is force protection, that's always in the back of your mind. That's the reason you stop a car that's speeding on an adjacent road, is not necessarily just to issue a ticket. It's to have an engagement and try to understand whether that person constitutes a threat.
And I think that goes to the issue that Dr. Singh has been raising in terms of training, so that we create a flexibility among our officers. And actually, I keep talking about morale, and then it also, I would imagine, increases morale because you then know that you are prepared. Dr. Singh, I want to follow up with you on something that I'm just struck with, and that's that there was a startling, unequal law enforcement response to the Black Lives Matter protests last summer, and then the white nationalist insurrection that we saw on January 6th. And that's somewhat haunting to me. And we actually, at our last hearing, Chair Lofgren noted that there was an officer who said, and this is the officer's quote, that a radio broadcast was sent out to outside units. It said, "We are not looking for any pro-Trump in the crowd. We are only looking for anti-pro-Trump who wants to start a fight." So that goes back to the concern about ignoring what we were seeing coming down, and just that there was an unequal deployment of concern regarding this. And you've spoken a lot about the importance of culture. So what advice would you give to the Capitol Police and its board as they look to improve the department's culture and ensure that justice is applied effectively and equitably?
Right. Well, as I'm listening really to all of this, that intelligence unit within the Capitol Police should be focused in on everything that they see. They are not trained to the level that they need to be able to analyze information. And so for them to say, well, it's coming in on a website, it's not credible. That is very credible, because that's how domestic terrorism actually advertises. That's how they recruit. That's how they push events. And so that intel piece has to be focused on, and they need to be reporting it regardless. And they need to look at everything with an eye of scrutiny. And that's what I think was missing, right? We just missed the boat, and we said, oh, well, that's never going to happen. But yet all the indication was it was surely going to happen. We did not read the intelligence right. And I'm not talking formal intelligence. I'm talking what happens out on social media. Even when Baltimore hit, we knew that things were happening because it was being driven on social media. That's where we were picking it up. It wasn't coming through the FBI or any of that. Yes, we got some of that, but we were seeing it come through social media.
Having our eyes and ears open to what's happening around us. My time has expired. Thank you very much. I yield back, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. The vote was called about 25 minutes ago. We get a half an hour to vote. I'm hoping that they'll not have a short gavel because I want to at least get a couple questions in if I could. It's been striking to me that General Buchanan and General Singh, you have very similar takes on this whole situation. I appreciate the time and energy that you put into this and the advice that you've given to us. Based on the experience that both of you have had, what do you think is the most significant deficiency within the Capitol Police and the Capitol Police Board?
So
General Singh, you want to go first?
Sure. I would say the most significant piece is the relationships and communication that happens that's got to improve like immediately. I mean, we can change the structure, but if we can't get leaders meeting and talking about issues, talking about challenges and respecting one another's opinion, and I'm not saying that that's happening today, but that has to change. That's first and foremost has to change.
General Buchanan?
Thanks, ma'am. I think it's, as far as the board is concerned, it's related directly to what General Singh just talked about, but it has to do with openness and transparency. The people below them, the people above them should understand what's going on, why they're making decisions. And that's directly related to communication. As far as the Capitol Police itself, I think General Singh hit on a bunch of the cultural changes that need to happen, and I did as well. For me, the biggest issue is we'll always be stuck in our past if we don't become a learning organization, if we don't fight to get better every day.
Well, I want to thank you two, and as well as the professor who had, by previous agreement, had to leave earlier. As I said, the night of the attack, to the speaker as well as the ranking member, and have said consistently and publicly since then, the insurrectionist attack has to be subject to vigorous oversight, including both by an independent bipartisan commission as well as our committee of jurisdiction and other committees that have jurisdiction. We have had active oversight on the January 6th attack. In fact, this committee has had more hearings on the January 6th attack than any other committee in Congress, and we're not through yet. I think it's important to note that, this didn't begin just after January 6th. In the last Congress, we instituted monthly meetings with both the Capitol Police and its Inspector General, which were open to the minority staff as well. We also held bi-weekly meetings with the Fraternal Order of Police, as well as nonprofit groups to discuss the Capitol Police operation effectiveness and transparency, as well as its interaction with members, employees, and the public. We also held a public oversight hearing, and we have raised a number of concerns in that hearing and in those meetings about training and other things. But obviously, we're not there. That work laid the groundwork for this hearing, and we have more work to do. I'd like to, by unanimous consent, enter into the record the following material: a written statement by the former director of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, General Jonathan Cofer. He discusses the department's potential shift to a protective agency model, and he actually oversaw that to the Pentagon. So it's very insightful testimony, as well as the Senate Sergeant at Arms statement, a letter from the 9/11 Commission chairs Thomas Keane and Lee Hamilton, a letter from former national security, military, and elected officials, as well as a list prepared by the Nonpartisan Congressional Research Service outlining the many times that the full Capitol Police Board has testified at past congressional hearings. It actually is not correct that they have not appeared as a group before the Congress since 1945. In fact, they have appeared numerous times as a group and many more times individually. So that will go into the record. We will also, members have additional questions. I'm sorry that The timing did not permit an additional round of questions, but the record is open for members who have additional questions, and we would ask all of the witnesses to respond to those questions in writing, and the hearing will be held open for those responses. I want to thank each one of you. Certainly, the architect and General Walker are employed by the House, but everyone else is a volunteer. You're just here to help us out. And we appreciate that your sense of patriotism and service to your country would lead you to do that. And with that, with thanks, this hearing is adjourned.